Chapter 9 The Conquest of Gravity. Ralph 124C 4+1. Alice and her father have been invited the next day to Ralph's lab, as he wishes to show them some of his latest discoveries. They find him sitting in front of his desk while he is engaged in dictating scientific data to thin air. "Ah," says Alice as she enters, "you're evidently using some of the methods of my kidnapper, since you seem to be dictating to an invisible secretary." "Nothing so complicated," says Ralph. Ralph, who then welcomes them, denies the charge and goes on to explain to his party his new invention. The evolution of the letter writing has been a slow and painful one. Our remote ancestors, many thousands of years ago, carved their letters in stone slabs. Later on, the more civilized Egyptians wrote their letters upon papyrus. Still later, upon the invention of paper and ink, communications and letters could be written much better and faster in that improved manner. Later still, the typewriter came into use. All of these methods had one great drawback. It was possible to easily falsify such records. While there have been handwriting experts, it happens very frequently in olden times, too frequently in fact, that a signature on such an important document as, for instance, a will, was forged, and has become a question for handwriting experts to decide whether the signature is genuine. But even the handwriting experts are not always right. It has often occurred to me that it should be possible to use the human voice as its own document, so that it can be preserved in a different manner than the phonographic method discovered in the 20th century. Of course, under that method it is possible for one to speak one's last will and testament, but it is a clumsy way and is rarely used on account of its high cost. Furthermore, it is difficult to make copies of a talk. Then, too, the disc or cylinder upon which the phonographic record is made is very fragile and can be broken either accidentally or purposely. The method you see me using is phonetic, and it is practically impossible to falsify such a record. Watch how the machine works. Ralph reseats himself at his desk and starts to talk. Facing him on the desk is a machine of about the shape of an old-fashioned typewriter, except that there are no keys. There are a few dials and knobs, and from the top of the cabinet a white sheet of paper slowly emerges as Ralph dictates. When he has finished, he presses a button and the entire sheet is ejected. It is covered with a queer-looking wave lines, similar to the lines made by a seismograph when recording earthquakes. Queer little parallel lines with humps at the tops that increase from very short wave-like scrolls to long ones. The entire sheet is covered with these lines in indelible ink. Ralph shows Alice the page and goes on explaining. The page which you see here is an exact record of my voice, but just as no two fingerprints are alike in this world, no two voices are alike either. Each has certain characteristics produced by certain overtones in the voices of the various individuals. The pronunciation of individuals varies, so does the intonation, so does the speed of talking, so does the timbre of the voice, and 100 other differences that to an expert are observable immediately. Suppose, then, during my life I have recorded a great many documents similar to this one. The waves traced on this piece of paper have certain characteristics which are entirely individual. Here are 2 sheets of paper, both containing the Lord's Prayer, but spoken by 2 different individuals in my office. Both of these individuals have voices that are very nearly alike, yet you can see how great a difference there is between the lines. On one sheet the lines are much heavier and swing in quite an apparently different manner. By reference to authentic documents of this character, it will be impossible to falsify any record by having someone else make such a spoken record. A will or any other important document will in the future be made by this machine and will do away with many court cases and much business squabble, and much shirking of responsibility. Furthermore, by my method it is possible with the same machine to make as many as 25 copies at one time while the original is being made. This is done by a chemical process in the machine itself, the copies being simply thin chemical papers which are being developed at the same time as the voice writing is being made. Reading these pages is not as difficult as you might think. It would be necessary, however, to know the phonoalphabet. The phonealphabet is not very much different from the alphabet that you know. Every syllable and every consonant used by you make a certain impression in my machine, and while it may vary as explained before, still it remains roughly the same, exactly as handwriting by different persons may vary. But still you can read because the characteristics are the same. The same is true of my machine. By studying the characters of the phonealphabet, It is possible within a few weeks to learn how to read a phonetic letter with the same ease that you read a handwritten or typewritten letter. I expect that in the schools of the future, children will be taught the phonalphabet so that everyone will be able to read phonetic records. Another feature of my invention is that if you do not wish to read the letter, you can listen to it. Saying so, Ralph inserts the letter into an odd-shaped cabinet which has a slot at the top. Two grippers slowly begin to draw the paper into the inside of the machine. Ralph turns two knobs and pushes a button, and within a few seconds his own voice is heard with unmistakable clarity, repeating what he has said 15 minutes before. This machine likewise is very simple, says Ralph. The ink tracing on the paper record is opaque, while the paper itself is more or less transparent under a strong light. A light-sensitive cell on the other side slowly moves from left to right, taking off the entire phonetic record, as it were. This light-sensitive cell moves in the same ratio and with the same speed that I originally dictated, and the words are reproduced exactly as I spoke them by means of a loud-speaking telephone coupled to an amplifier. Thus it is now possible to have a double record, an audible and a written one, and with the two it is practically impossible to falsify records. As you know, there have been some big embezzlement scandals recently, and it was not always possible to convict those suspected due to the clever methods which those swindlers used. One great advantage of the new system is that it is done entirely by machine and does away with the human element. I do not require my real secretary when I dictate. I sit alone in my study or office and simply talk. There is one unique place I am sure you will be interested in. Ralph leads the way to the elevator, and they quickly shoot up to the roof, where they board one of Ralph's flyers and within a few minutes are headed north. The machine rises until they are about 20,000 feet up. The cold makes it necessary to turn on the heat in the enclosed cab. In the distance just ahead, there shortly appears a brilliant spot of light suspended in the dark sky, which quickly increases in size as they approach. From a distance, it appears like an enormous hemisphere with a flat side facing the earth below. As they draw closer, they can see that it is a great city suspended in the air, apparently covered with a transparent substance, just as if a toy city had been built on a dinner plate and covered with a bell-shaped globe. They alight on the rim at the landing stage outside the transparent covering. They are soon walking along a warm, beautifully laid-out street. Here is neither bustle nor noise. The deepest calm prevails. There are small houses of an old-fashioned design. There are shops in great profusion. There are playgrounds, neatly laid out parks, but without looking at the humans that are walking around, the visitors feel as if they have gone back many centuries. There are no power roller skates, no automatic vehicles. There are no aeroflyers beneath the glass ceiling. Instead, a serene calm prevails, while people with happy expressions on their faces are leisurely walking to and fro. Very much puzzled, Alice wants to know what this mysterious glass-encased city is. This, explains Ralph, is one of our many vacation cities that I hope will soon dot every part of the world. People are living entirely too intensely nowadays, and with the many functions they have to perform, with all the labor-saving devices they have, their lives are speeded up to the breaking point. The businessman or executive must leave his work every month for a few days if he is not to become a wreck. Heretofore we have sent him to the mountain tops or to the seashore. There he found no rest. The noise, even on top of the mountains, due to aeroflyers and other vehicles, does not give the man real rest. On our floating city, there is absolute rest. There is no noise, no excitement, not even a radio telephone. The city, 20,000 feet above the ground, is floating in perfectly clean and uncontaminated air. This air, while less dense than that further down, is renewed automatically every few hours. It is invigorating just the same as mountain air with all its benefits. The roof is made of steel latticework, thick glass panes being fitted in between the steel frames. The shape is in the form of a huge dome covering the entire city, which measures about a little over a mile in circumference. The height of the center of the dome from the floor to the city is about 200 feet. At night, the city is illuminated by cold light from high-frequency wires running below the dome, similar to the system now used to light up our cities. The floor upon which the entire city rests is stellonium, and the city is held up by means of anti-gravitational impulse. By neutralizing the gravity for the area below the floating city and a little beyond it, it is possible to keep the floating city at any distance from the Earth. In other words, we use a gravitational screen and then build a city on top of this screen. By charging the gravitational screen at a very high potential, we nullify gravity, and as the city no longer has any weight, it can be placed on any level and remain there practically indefinitely. A few propellers keep the city from being blown away by storms or wind. Although it is very cold in the aeroflyer as we came up, it is nice and warm on the streets here, nor is there any artificial heating during the daytime. There is perpetual sunshine during the day at this level, at which practically no clouds ever form. The city, being entirely roofed over by the glass dome and the interior being filled with air, the sun quickly heats up the atmosphere. Within 2 hours after the sun rises, the air is balmy, and it would become stifling hot if the air were not renewed from time to time. Air is a poor conductor of heat, and if the air were not renewed, it would soon be 150 degrees in the shade. Cold air, however, from the outside is continually drawn in so that an even temperature is maintained. Only at night is the city heated artificially, as without the sunlight at this altitude it soon becomes exceedingly cold. All the heating is done by electricity, and a uniform temperature is maintained during the night, which is somewhat less than the temperature during the day. There is nothing that a man or woman can do up here except rest, and that is precisely what they do. 1 week's rest up here is equivalent to a month's rest down below. Ralph, with Alice and her father, stroll through the suspended city in which the simple life is keynote. There are recreational parks, gymnasiums, baths of various kinds such as hydrotherapy, electrotherapy, and others. There are sun parlors and sun-baking parks. The din of the city, the curse of man's own handiwork, is absent. Everyone wears either felt or rubber shoes. The entire atmosphere is delightful and restful. It is with genuine regret that Alice and her father return to the Aeroflyer and back to New York. That night after dinner, Ralph takes his guests to a new entertainment that has just become popular. They enter a big building on which in big fiery letters is inscribed, "Gravitational Circus." Ralph explains to his guests that with the invention of the nullifying of gravitation, many new and wonderful effects have come about. Gravity, he explains, is an electromagnetic manifestation in the ether, the same as light, radio waves, etc. It has always been the dream of scientists for hundreds of years to nullify the effect of gravitation. In other words, Ralph continues, if you pick up a stone and open your hand, the stone will fall to the ground. Why does it fall? First, because the earth attracts the stone, and second, because the stone attracts the earth. There is a definite gravitational pull between the two. The effect of the stone in pulling up the earth is, however, inconsequential, and while the stone does exert a certain amount of pull towards the earth, the latter is so much larger that the effect on the earth is not felt at all. If scientists had argued for hundreds of years, you could interpose between the stone and the earth a screen which nullified its gravity. The stone will not fall down when let go, but will remain suspended, exactly where you leave it. Scientists also argue that if gravitation is an electromagnetic manifestation of the ether, it should be possible to overcome and nullify it by electric means. It takes hundreds of years, however, before the correct solution was found. It was known that certain high-frequency currents would set up an interference with gravitational waves, for it had been found in the first part of our century that gravitation was indeed a waveform, the same as light waves or radio waves. When this interference between the two waves, namely the gravitational waves and the electrical waves, is discovered, it is found that a metallic screen charged by electric high-frequency waves will indeed nullify gravitation to a certain extent. If you charge the metal netting in this fashion and you weighed yourself on a spring scale on top of the screen, insulated, of course, from the screen itself, your weight would be roughly diminished by 1/2. In other words, about half of the gravitation has been nullified and the other half still remaining. Thus things stand until about 2 years ago, when I began to occupy myself with the problem. I reasoned that while we have done much, still much more remains. Our anti-gravitational screen still lets through some of the gravitational waves, for it has been found in the first part we could not seem to counteract. I felt that it was not so much the effect of the current as the material of the screen which seemed to be at fault. Experimental work along this line convinced me that I was on the right track, and that if ever gravitation was to be annulled in its entirety, a screen of a special material would have to be evolved in order to obtain the desired results. I finally found that only the densest material known, namely thoroiridium, would completely stop the gravitational waves, providing that the metal screen was uninterruptedly bombarded with alpha rays, which are continually emitted by radium. The screen finally evolved was expensive to make at first, but quantity production now has very considerably lowered the price. By this time, the party has found their seats in the amphitheater, and they have seated themselves. The seats are all around a ring, which does not look much different from the old-fashioned circus ring, except that it is perhaps a little larger. The gravitational screen, Ralph explains, is located below and could not be actually seen. The machinery, too, is located in the basement. A fine wire netting surrounds the entire arena from top to bottom, the purpose of which becomes apparent later. It is an old-fashioned horse and bareback rider act. Suddenly the gravitation is cut off and the horse rises, beating the air with his hooves, while the rider, in a sitting position, hangs onto the horse with his legs. The horse and rider no longer have any weight. They cannot, of course, entirely control their movements. Both horse and rider at times hang with their heads downward and sideways until finally, by jerking, they arrive in the center of the arena. The horse has been well trained and ceases pawing the air, and his legs hang limp. The rider mounts on the back of the horse and with a slight jump reaches the ceiling of the arena some hundreds of feet up. Having no weight left, he bounces by the least muscular effort. Pushing against the ceiling with one of his fingers, he bounds down to the floor of the arena, only to rebound again to the ceiling. He keeps this up for a few minutes, and then repeats the same thing sideways, where he hits against the wire netting stretched from top to bottom of the arena to keep the performer from falling into the audience. The gravitational field extends only vertically, but was not in evidence immediately beyond the sides of the arena. Had there been no screen, the performer, when passing outside the gravitational boundary, would have immediately regained his full weight and would have fallen. The performer could jerk himself around anywhere in the arena, and being a good acrobat, he had no difficulty in reaching his horse. Much care had to be exercised, however, because the slightest kick against the horse would have sent the horse to the opposite side. Slowly, gravitation is turned on, and both horse and rider sink gracefully towards the ground, where, with full gravitation restored, the horse and rider make their exit. The next act is one that even Ralph has not seen. Two experts at juggling bound into the arena, and after the gravitation is cut off, one of them places a billiard cue on his forehead and an old-fashioned hand lamp on top of the cue. The juggler then takes the cue away and withdraws jerkily. The lamp remains in the same position until brought down by one of the performers. The trick aroused great enthusiasm among the audience. An acrobat using one of the billiard cues as a standing trapeze revolves around the trapeze as if it was held securely in place. By jerking around the billiard cue, it was made to appear as if he is actually swinging around under his full weight. A beautiful effect is obtained when the jugglers bring several colored glass pitchers filled with different colored liquids. With the pitchers inverted, nothing happens. The liquid, having no weight, cannot flow out. However, by turning the pitcher upside down and suddenly jerking it away, the colored liquid, due to its own lag or inertia, stays behind. Due to the surface tension of liquids, it did not retain the shape of the pitcher, but forms itself immediately into a globe. The jugglers empty a number of pitchers all in a row, leaving behind the globular liquid balls formed of water and fruit juice. The jugglers approach the balls and begin to drink, simply by placing their lips against them. They then demonstrate the mobility of the water balls by pushing their fingers into them and cutting the balls in two, the halves immediately becoming new and smaller balls. Then, by carefully giving each of the balls a slight push, the water balls will gravitate up to the ceiling of the arena and still have enough momentum left that they will rebound and come back, only to be pushed up again by flat tennis rackets. This has to be done carefully because the slightest false motion spreads out the water balls into a flat sheet. The surface tension of the liquid always reasserts itself, and the water balls come down sometimes in an elliptical shape. Every time the flat tennis racket hits the ball, they lose their shape momentarily, but soon are globular again. The two jugglers finally manage to push the liquid spheres into one another, until finally all balls have been joined into one. This, of course, amalgamates the various colors, but the colors have been made in such a way that the balls become a somewhat dirty-looking white, all the colors having recombined, making one color, just as all the hues of the rainbow, if combined together, make white. The final act is where a huge water ball about 25 feet in diameter is pushed to the center of the arena, while a number of pretty girls enter the liquid itself and swim within the ball. The ball is lit up by strong searchlights, and the entire arena darkens as the girls swim within the clear crystal water ball. When the swimmers need air, all they have to do is push their heads out of the sphere, breathe, and then resume swimming or jerking themselves around within the weightless water. End of chapter 9.